What's up, you guys? Welcome to Sector for Nerds, and welcome to another episode of Star Wars: The Clone Wars Retro Discussions. Today we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 7, Duel of the Droids. This episode was written by Rob Coleman and written by Kevin Campbell and Henry Gilroy. We got two writers for this one. The cookie for this episode: hold on to your friends by keeping your heart a little softer than your head. Before I turn it over to Intro Guy, make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you could head over to my other YouTube channel called Top 10 Character Moments and subscribe there as well, that would be great as well. At the time of this recording, you guys, we just recently passed over 300 subscribers over there. So thank you guys so much to all those who have gone over and subscribed. Thank you guys so much for helping me get there. My next subscriber goal is going to be 500 subscribers. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe. All right, you guys, without any further ado, Intro Guy, your turn. Missing in action. Anakin Skywalker's heroic droid navigator, R2-D2, was lost in battle. When a desperate search fails to locate R2, Anakin is forced to take on a new navigator, R3-S6. Now, the Jedi embark on a dangerous new mission to find a secret enemy listening post. Meanwhile, R2-D2 has fallen into the hands of a vile droid smuggler and is on his way to General Grievous, who will surely plunder the Republic's secrets hidden within him. Thank you, Intro Guy. For those who might be wondering who this guy is, this guy that I keep putting a picture up afterwards that says thank you. For those that care, it's a professional wrestler. His name is Chad Gable, and one of his, gimmicks is just, telling people thank you. He says it exactly like that, but for mine, I switch it up a little bit. But every time I say the word thank you, I just think of him now. And I mean, it's proper to thank people, right? Intro Guy comes in here, he does his bit. I'm very appreciative of it. There's a lot that happens in this episode, very similar to last episode as well, which we were talking about last week. But one of the things that they reveal at the start of this episode is Gha Nachkt's name, because I think I'd said last week, right? Obviously I know his name now, but it's when they talk about the name, they don't talk about it until this episode, and I think Grievous says it on multiple occasions. I do have a question. He says, I prefer to get my reward in cash. Is cash even a thing in Star Wars? Unless cash credits the same thing, Republic credits might equivalent to cash. I don't know. I think that's the first time I've ever heard the word cash in Star Wars. R2's still a prisoner on this ship, so he ends up trying to get a message out to Anakin in the Twilight, and Anakin's like, that's R2's voice, and Ahsoka's like, oh, that doesn't sound like R2, and Anakin's like, I can never forget that voice. And it was something we talked about last week as well, right? Anakin has such this attachment to R2-D2. For those who watch the micro series, right? Padme gifted R2 to Anakin as a gift. So it's not just this idea that, yeah, R2 is a friend, he's like the family dog, but it's also just this idea of it's a connection to his wife. They go to a place called Skytop Station in this episode. That's where Gha Nachkt takes R2, and that's where Anakin tracks him to. This is the station that they were talking about in the last episode when they were saying Grievous has got some kind of secret listening post out there, and that's why he's been able to ambush our fleets. So they board the station. Poor Rex has to carry R3 on the way down. Comedy battle droids were in full effect for this episode as well. Immediately, the droid's carrying this box, and one tells him, be sure not to drop it. What's the first thing he does? He drops it. And one of them's got a bit of a headache, right? He's like, go up to level 8, get your head adjusted, it'll feel great. And then his head gets ripped off by a clone. Anakin continuing to call R3 Stubby. I don't know if we ever talked about that last week. Yeah, Anakin's nickname for R3 is Stubby. A little bit of behind the scenes with R2. I keep saying R2, I mean R3, the black and gold droid. Apparently Dave made him that way because he and his brother are Steelers fans, the Pittsburgh Steelers football team. I think Dave grew up in Pittsburgh, right? Or somewhere around there, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm sure people will correct me if I'm wrong. We learn that R3 is actually an agent of Grievous, and it's oh, he actually is evil. Because it's you don't, when you're first watching it, you don't necessarily know, right? Is R3 actually playing them? Or is he just he's struggling at his job, he's just trying to do his best, not everybody's good at everything. And then you sit there and you watch this episode and it's oh no, he's just been screwing with them the whole time. But it's not before Gha Nachkt ends up dying, because, they break into R2, right? And I'm actually saying the right droid this time. I am talking about R2. And they're cracking his head open, right? They're trying to get all the information out of him. And it's it appears this droid's mission memory has never been erased. And Grievous is sitting there you've suddenly earned your payment this time. And the dude just starts getting greedy, and he's like, you know what, if this droid's worth more, I get paid more. And then Grievous just stabs him, and he's like, there's your bonus. You figure Grievous was gonna kind of kill him either way, right? Like, he was never gonna pay him. Though at the same time, like, surely you would have thought, like, okay, maybe keep him alive and have him do more hunting, but I don't know, I guess, like, with this R2 unit, right, like, that was gonna be Grievous's big payday. If it had, like, every bit of strategies that the Republic had inside his brain, like, that would have been a huge tide changer for the war. So I guess he figures, yeah, I don't need him anymore. Magna Guards are back in this episode. I say they're back, I mean, we haven't seen them, I don't think, since the Clone Wars movie, when they were helping out Dooku. This is our first time seeing Grievous with them, and they're supposed to be his guards. We're introduced to a little thing called Droid Poppers in this episode. Basically just the shape of a thermal detonator, you throw it, deactivates all the droids. They have to use them in a tight spot because R3, you know, they are trying to get R3 to open up the door, and obviously Ahsoka's trying to defend R3, like, he's working on it, just give him a little bit of time, and then it gets to a point where they run out of time, battle droids attack them, super battle droids come from behind, and that's where Rex and the boys just start throwing the detonators. And then we get to the part of the episode that I feel like we're gonna have the most discussion on, because I feel like this is a big thing that happens. This is probably the biggest thing that happens in this whole episode, and that's Ahsoka taking on General Grievous. And right out of the gate, when she goes at him, within like 2 moves, she's taken out. All the clones start opening fire at Grievous. Grievous is deflecting the blaster bolts back at them. He leaps in the air and he like swings his lightsaber, cuts up a few of them, kicks Rex and another clone down to the ground. Real quickly, going on a small tangent, that clone's name is Denal. I remember having an action figure of him growing up, right? Like, because I used to collect all the Clone Wars action figures. I'd play with them when I was little. And I remember seeing that clone again in the Clone Wars, like watching through it. I'm like, oh, hey, that's the one I have the action figure of. That's Denal. So that's how I know him. He and Rex were the only 2 surviving clones. But going back to Grievous and Ahsoka, right? Like, Grievous is gonna take out Rex for good, and Ahsoka jumps in there and stops him from doing so, saying, wouldn't you prefer a challenge? And Grievous kind of is like, that wouldn't be you. And he pulls out a second lightsaber, right? Because before he only had 1 out, now he's got 2. And Ahsoka, this is one of the interesting things that David said in the featurette for this episode, is that Ahsoka's quick. Her size is an advantage. And she's been trained for these situations. Because I know that, I'm sure there were probably people back in the good old days of this show being a thing, people that were probably a lot older than I was when I first started watching, that probably felt a little bit indifferent about this just because that, well, Ahsoka shouldn't be able to take on Grievous. Like, Grievous is much more powerful than her. She shouldn't stand a chance. And like, I sit there, I'm like, guys, Ahsoka just got her butt kicked in seconds by him, like just before this little encounter. But you also got to remember too, right? Like, Ahsoka is a Jedi. Like, she's not a Jedi Knight or anything like that, but she has been trained. Now, this doesn't mean that she can defeat him, but it does mean that she can at least defend herself from him. And she even alludes to it later, right? Like, at this point, she's just trying to buy time. That's why she keeps on running. That's why she's hiding and trying to lure the general away, so that way Rex and Denal can get the explosives all good to go and, you know, they can continue on with their mission. For Ahsoka, she knows it's a matter of survival, but she also understands her prerogative. Now, there is the one moment, right, where she's hiding, and this is kind of like where R3 really just starts to reveal his true colors, because it's like R3 shows up and Ahsoka's like, hey, Goldie, over here, over here. And then immediately he just shines the light on her and she's like, no, what are you doing? And then, of course, Grievous shows up and Ahsoka runs away, and then she realizes later that it's because R3 is nothing more than an agent for the general. Ahsoka should have stayed hidden up there, because the moment when she was down on the ground and she had her lightsabers, she's just walking around and Grievous just snatches her up. I'm like, oh no! And David talked about it in the featurette too, that he knew, like, if we were going to put Ahsoka against Grievous, we knew we had to put her in this kind of situation where Grievous has her right for the picking. And it's not until Anakin and Rex light up the explosives, that she's able to get away. Because the explosion, it kind of like, you know, shakes the station up. Ahsoka's able to get like a grip on her lightsaber and cut off one of Grievous's hands. And at that point, like, she knows that she's just gotta run and get out of there. I remember even watching this for the first time too. I'm like, Ahsoka, you gotta go, you gotta go. And then when she reaches back for her lightsaber, I'm like, oh no, was that a mistake? And Grievous starts cutting the vent. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, it is one of those instances where you could potentially think like, oh my gosh, could Ahsoka die? Now, where is Anakin during all this? Because we haven't really brought up much of him yet. He's going around this station looking for R2, and eventually he catches up to him. He goes up against the Magna Guards. He kills them. But I just sit there thinking, like, every time, especially the final bit of the episode where Obi-Wan tells Anakin, like, so, Anakin, let me get this straight. You risked the mission, all of your men, even your Padawan, to save a droid. And I think there is an interesting idea in all of this. It's like, okay, Anakin, what if Ahsoka would have died here? Like, you heard, like, I know he was definitely freaked out, right? When he's like, where's Ahsoka? And Rex is like, she engaged General Grievous. And he just immediately like, alone?
Where is Ahsoka?
She engaged General Grievous.
Alone?
She distracted him while we completed the mission. It was on her orders, sir.
He was obviously very worried for her. But one thing I really wish that they would have done with this episode, and you know, maybe I can understand it, like if you only got 22 minutes, you only got so much time to do whatever, but I would have loved to have had like a scene with Anakin where he straight up talks with Ahsoka and is like, look, like, obviously, I'm happy you're alive. I'm happy that you were able to get away from Grievous and make it back here. But like, if you're ever in a position like that again, don't face that without me. Because Anakin this whole time is so wrapped up on R2, right? It's like R2, R2, R2. It's like, it feels like you're kind of forgetting about everybody else that's here that you're supposed to care about, right? Like between your little sister, the boys that you fight on the front lines with, and it's all over a droid. I get that that droid is R2, and I understand R2's importance, but I think there is a discussion to be had that, hey, Anakin, Obi-Wan's got a point here, and Ahsoka brings that up too. Now, in Anakin's defense, I don't think they knew that Grievous was on the station, right? Like, I don't think they ever say, like, oh, Grievous is here, we have a chance to capture him. So I don't think anybody, I don't know if they necessarily knew that he was there. So I can understand it from that perspective. But if they did know that Grievous was there, like, if I was doing a mission like this and I'd be like, hey, let's, you know, they bring up the idea, let's split up Padawan, I'd be like, maybe we'll find another way to do this. Like, if I was in Anakin's position, I would not want my Padawan taking on Grievous alone. If I was a Jedi Master. And if I was there, it'd maybe be a little bit of a different story, but even then, I'd still be worried. But the thing with Anakin and Grievous, right, is they can't meet each other until Revenge of the Sith. We talked about it last week, but the reason I'm bringing it up again this week is because this is where Dave mentions it in the featurette. He's like, yeah, so we can't have Anakin and Grievous meet, which sucks. Because it's two prominent characters in the show. So you would think like, oh, eventually these two would have a face-off and these two would go against each other. But you can't. And Dave talked about how hard it was to not have them do it, because it's something that he wants to see. It's something I definitely would have wanted to see. But per George and, you know, his rule, they can't meet because of that line in Revenge of the Sith.
Anakin Skywalker, I was expecting someone with your reputation to be a little older.
The part where R3 brings down the Vulture Droids, I'm just like, oh, this ain't gonna be good.
I've got a bad feeling about this, sir.
And then Super Battle Droids walk in, all the boys and Anakin run to take cover. Ahsoka kind of ends up being the tide changer of the battle, because she, like, she's crawling through the vents, right? She gets to the hangar and she leaps up on one of the Vulture Droids, and as one of them starts shooting at the one Ahsoka's on, so that one takes a bunch of damage, right? And then Ahsoka jumps over to the other one and cuts off that one's head. And it was kind of here, like, Anakin showed a little bit of concern for Ahsoka, right? Like, it was kind of a quick moment, like, it was foolish of you to take on Grievous by yourself. So I guess you could make the argument, like, okay, they did have a little bit of a discussion about it, but I just feel like, I don't know, for something like that, for a Padawan to go up against someone like Grievous, who is very powerful and is very, you know, very well trained in the Jedi arts by Count Dooku. She's very lucky to have survived. And maybe that could have been something that happened off screen as well. But like I said, I just know if I was in that situation and my Padawan was going up against Grievous like that, I'd be like, hey, next time, just get yourself as far away from him as possible and come find me. Because you are going to see later on in the Clone Wars, a little bit of foreshadowing to a couple episodes down the line, what happens when a Padawan thinks they're good enough to take on Grievous. We get a small battle between R2 and R3. It's like R2 facing off against his evil twin when R3 attaches the cable onto R2, and then R2, because he's like already let out a bunch of oil, lit it on fire, and then R2 takes his little buzzsaw, like the one he has in Return of the Jedi, and he starts cutting the rope, and like R3 just kind of like shakes his head back and forth like, no, don't do it, and then R2 does it, and R3 falls off the station, dies a gruesome death. And Anakin says at the end of the episode, after the Obi-Wan transmission, like, I knew you'd complete the mission, Ahsoka, but besides, R2 is more than a droid, he's a friend. And again, I get that. But like, I always like to think about the what ifs in this situation, right? Like, what if Ahsoka would have died? Like, what would have been your reaction then, Anakin? Like, you risked everything and you lost your Padawan to this, to saving R2. I don't know. I think it's an interesting discussion to be had whether or not Anakin was right to do what he did in this situation. And I don't necessarily think he was wrong. I just think that you have to, it just felt like he was like so head forward, you know, just, I have to get R2, like not thinking about what could happen all around him. And I mean like truly thinking about it. The only surviving clones were Rex, Denal, and the pilot that was controlling the Twilight. Like, you lost men to this. You don't think Rex was sitting there afterward like, yeah, some of my boys died tonight, and for what? Now, on the plus side, they did blow up the station. That's a good thing. And that would, I think, be the thing that I would tell Rex had I been there. Like, look, man, they died for the mission. They died for trying to blow up this station that has been causing us and our fleets a lot of trouble. They died heroes. This isn't my favorite episode of the ones we've watched so far. Like, I still like a lot of the other ones better. But one of the things that I do appreciate about this episode is there is definitely a lot to talk about. And that's why I want y'all to keep the discussions going in the comments below. That's going to wrap us up for today, you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to stay tuned every single week for a new episode of Star Wars The Clone Wars Retro Discussions. Next week, we are going to be talking about the episode titled Bomb Bad Jedi. Oh, this is where the fun begins. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others to help support the channel, and I will see you guys next time.
Anakin Skywalker, I was expecting someone with your reputation to be a little older.